Hello everyone, I'm Scott, and today we're going to get into day 7 of Brothers War spoilers. And I want to thank at the beginning here Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring our video. If you like the content, remember to like and subscribe so you can get further previews from the Brothers War and other future sets. And we'll be doing some top 10 lists along the way as well, and delving into some other content. So let's get into today's card. So first, I'm going to break it into 2 parts today to make it a little bit more digestible. The first part of it's going to be looking at the cards that are colored, and then we're going to look at all the artifact cards in a separate video. So stay tuned for that one if you're interested in those specifically. There's a separate video that's going to deal with that. All right, let's look at our white cards first. So mass production, for 6 mana, you get a sorcery. You get to create 4 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens. I just don't think it's good enough for standard play. I think it's fine in limited, and it'll be something that people will want there, but probably not anything more than a limited playable card. All right, next we've got Static Net. For 3 colorless and a white, you get an enchantment. When Static Net enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Static Net leaves the battlefield. When Static Net enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and create a tap Power Stone token. So this cost, we've got actually a number of enchantments similar to this already in standard that cost 2 or 3 mana. So I don't think this really has standard playability, even with the added advantage of gaining some life and creating a Power Stone. So I think white decks aren't going to want to go with this. In limited, I think it's a great card to have because it goes right along with the theme of the set. Everybody wants to have as many Power Stones as possible. This is going to help with that process. Next, we have Myrel, Shield of Argiv. For 3 and a colorless mana, you get a legendary creature who's a human soldier. During your turn, your opponents cannot cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Whenever Myrel, Shield of Argiv attacks, create X 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. Now, I talked actually about this card over the weekend. We got a preview of it, but it was obviously not the official preview, because this one is. And as I further investigated and looked at the card, it doesn't have a card number on it. So this was a fake in terms of the cost and the power and toughness. And I think actually as a 4 mana spell, it's actually better, because one of my concerns with Myrel was, okay, you attack with it, you may be able to create a few soldier tokens, but it probably dies within an attack or 2. Well, at 4 mana, it's a 3/4, and it still has all those really good, strong abilities. And it's going to be a lot harder to get it off the battlefield. And since then, we've also gotten a few cards that I think will support it well. So I think this is actually an even better card, given its 4 mana cost as opposed to its 2 mana cost, because of that added toughness that it has. It's going to stick around on the board longer than the 2 mana or a 2 mana version would. So I think this is a really good card. I think it's going to see standard play. The soldiers deck looks like it's going to be a real deck, and this is going to be I think a key part of that. Next, we have Sky Striker Officer. For 2 and a blue mana, you get a human soldier with flying. When Sky Striker Officer attacks, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token, tap 3 untapped soldiers you control, and you draw a card. This is a really good card, and it's a 2/3 on top of that, so it does die to cut down. But the fact that when you attack with it, you get to create more soldiers is a really good thing. One of the problems with the stuff that we saw from Dominator United that created human soldier tokens, it was hard, and sometimes it was hard to trigger those. One of them, you had to have a creature that had power and basically power or toughness, or I think it was power greater than its static power. So it was attainable, but basically you had to get a +1 counter on it, or you had to have something that buffed it. And as a result of it, that didn't trigger every turn. And then the other one was Tauren for 3 mana. And Tauren created human soldier tokens as well, but it was a little bit clunky in terms of the way that it created them. This is a clear-cut, easy. You attack with it, you create one. It's a guaranteed token creation if you attack with it. So I think this is a better version of some of those cards. And I think it's got a chance of seeing some play in that Soldier's deck. Next we have Keeper of the Cadence. For 4 and a blue, you get a human wizard that's a 2/5. And for 3 mana, you can put target artifact, instant, or sorcery card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. It's an okay ability, but probably not standard playable. Maybe in limited it sees some play, but I don't see it seeing any standard play at all. Next we have, moving into black here, we've got 9 vermin. For a black mana, you get a rat creature that's a 1/1, and when 9 vermin enters the battlefield, target player mills 2 cards, and when 9 vermin dies, target creature you don't control gets -1/-1 until end of turn. 9 vermin is going to be an annoying creature in standard. It's going to see play. It's a 1-drop. And the thing that will become really annoying about it is it can kill 2 toughness creatures. You block it, you use the -1/-1 to kill something, to kill that creature that it just blocked, or it blocks a 1/1 and it can kill another 1/1. So it's going to be an annoying card. We saw a similar card in the last year or so in standard, so we're going to see this one. It's just get ready for it because it's going to be there. Next we have Gurgling Anointer. For 2 and a black mana, you get a Phyrexian Horror. It has flying, and whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Gurgling Anointer. When Gurgling Anointer dies, return another target creature card with mana value less than or equal to Gurgling Anointer's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. There's this draw a second card theme throughout the set. So in a deck that's going to draw a second card each turn, this is going to be a very good card because it's just going to keep growing. And the fact that it's +1/+1 counters, I think is important because it just means it's just going to keep growing and growing if it's not dealt with early. And that secondary ability of returning a card to your hand that's a creature that has mana value less than or equal to Gurgling Anointer's power is a pretty good ability, because I can see this getting to 4 or 5, and then hey, you can bring your Sheoldred back, no problem. They killed it, but Gurgling Anointer finally gets killed, and it brings Sheoldred back to the battlefield, and that's the big part about it. It brings it back to the battlefield, not to your hand. So this, I think, is going to see standard play too. And again, this could go in a connive deck or something like that, but it's just a good card as we move forward in standard. So expect to see it. Next, we have Fateful Cooperation. For 3 and a black mana, you get a sorcery. Choose target artifact or creature you control. Draw cards equal to its mana value. And then an opponent gains control of that permanent. This goes back to the cooperation between Thanos and Ashnod. They had this interesting cooperative relationship between the two of them, where they, as the apprentices of Mishra and Urza, they actually work together at times, and it is Ashnod who actually gives Thanos the Silex that Urza will use to end the brothers' war. And this is a take on that. I don't think it's playable, really. I guess if you were going to sacrifice one of the artifacts that's 8 mana or 7 mana to cast, you get a ton of value there in terms of card draw, but I really don't see this as more than something that's cute and limited playable. All right, next we have Misery's Shadow. For a colorless and a black mana, you get a shade. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead, which is a really great ability. Here's how you get rid of all of the annoying creatures that are in the Esper deck, particularly things like Tenacious Underdog or Dennick that comes back from the graveyard. And it's a 2/2 creature, and you for 1 mana you can pump it up and give it +1/+1 to the end of turn. So I think this is a pretty good 2-drop that I think mono black might want to try in that spot, because there's only one creature currently in the 2-drop spot in the mono black aggro / mid-range deck, and I think this is a good one to try. And that exile ability when a creature dies is really important, because you kill your opponent's creature, it exiles it now, and you don't have to worry about it anything else, and the shade will just take care of that for you. Next we have some red cards, and we're going to start out with Giant Cinder Maw for 2 and a red mana. You get a dinosaur beast that has trample and is a 4/3, but most importantly, and why this card is going to see a good deal of standard play, is players cannot gain life. I cannot tell you how powerful that ability is on a red card, because one of the big problems for mono red or red decks is all the life gain that's in standard, and Giant Cinder Maw just shuts all that down. So you have to kill Giant Cinder Maw, otherwise you can't gain life. And red a lot of times can deal 20 damage in a reasonable amount of time to win a game, but because of life gain on the other side, it stops it from winning that matchup. So Giant Cinder Maw is a great addition to mono red, and the fact that it also has trample is a nice ability as well. So I think this will definitely see play in sideboards and probably in some main decks. And just so you may not be aware of this, we had a similar card from the Ixalan block called Rampaging Ferocidon, and it was banned almost immediately because it shut off the life gain and was basically too powerful for standard. So the fact that they're reprinting one is interesting, that basically has the same abilities. That one had menace, this one has trample, but really good cards, and I think we'll see a lot of this in standard over the next 20 months or so. All right, next we have Goblin Blast Runner. For a red mana, you get a Goblin Blast Runner, gets +2/+0, and has menace as long as you sacrifice a permanent this turn. A card that kind of fits nicely into our Only Called Anvil deck as a 1-drop, because you're sacrificing a permanent pretty much every turn to activate the Only Called Anvil abilities. So this is going to be a 3/2 with menace for 1 mana, and that's just great. All right, next we have Arms Race. For 3 colorless mana and a red, you get an enchantment that you can pay 4 mana, and you may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. That artifact gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. It's a nice card. It's a cute card. I don't think it sees standard play, because you're probably not going to want to, in essence, blitz in for 4 mana a whole bunch of artifacts. I can see in an artifact focus deck you might want to try this to see if it has some really big impact. I guess if you're sending in a 9 or a 10 mana artifact and only going to cost 4 for that turn, but also you're taking a turn off to play this. So I think standard playability is questionable at best. Limited if you've got a creature focused deck and you're looking to put one of your big creatures on the field at a lower mana cost. This is a way to potentially do that. All right, next we have Over the Top. For 7 mana. You get a sorcery. Each player reveals a number of cards from the top of their library equal to the number of non-land permanents they control. Put all permanent cards revealed that way onto the battlefield and put the rest into their graveyard. This is crazy. I know it's 7 mana, but this is a crazy card. Think about this in mono red. Think about this in mono, in a Boros shell, that you build up to this and then you cast this and you flood your board with creatures, because you probably already have 4, 5, or 6 things on the field at that point, and this could just would in essence double the things that you have on the field. So I can see this seems some standard play potentially in a Boros mid-range deck or a red mid-range deck, where you've got a lot of little guys out there, and then you cast this in the mid to late game to double all your stuff up, and you're doing pretty good. Now, the downside of it is, and this is why the playability is questionable, is it does it for both players. So if your opponent has a huge board state, you don't want to cast this card, because it could end up leading to a situation where they're in a better position than you are. But if they don't really have a board presence that is significant compared to yours, it's a great card to cast. And I think that's the problem with it. That unknown board state. So maybe it's a sideboard card that comes in when you know your opponent isn't playing much that's actually going to be on the battlefield. They're doing things that, like Hadi-Jin decks, that they're trying to counter everything, and if you get early down 3 or 4 things, and then you can cast this in the late game, you can double your board state and then hopefully attack and win on the next turn. All right, next we have a couple of green cards. We have Wasteful Harvest for 2 and a green mana. You get an instant where you mill 5. You may put a permanent card from among the cards milled this way into your hand. A fine limited card, possibly a mill deck would want it. And it does give you some card filtering here in green, which you don't typically get. But outside of that dedicated mill deck where you're doing self-mill, I don't think you're going to want to see this in games. Next, and our last our next green card here is Argothian Sprite. For a colorless and a blue mana, you get a fairy, and it's a 2/2, and Argothian Sprite cannot be blocked by artifact creatures. For 7 mana, you can put 2+1 counters on Argothian Sprite. A good limited card, probably doesn't see much play outside of that, unless the format becomes so artifact creature driven that this then just becomes a really good card because artifact creatures can't block it. All right, moving on to our last 2 colored cards of the day. We've got Hero of the Dunes for 3 and a white and a black mana. You get a human soldier. When Hero of the Dunes enters the battlefield, return target artifact or creature card with value 3 mana or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And creatures you control with mana value 3 or less get +1/+0. Overall, it's a well-designed card. I mean, it gives you a ton of value. The 3/2 body isn't great, but for 5 mana, you're getting to take a card from your graveyard, put it back on the field, and then your creatures that are mana values 3 or less, they get a +1 buff. My only problem with this card, it's in black. And if you look at all the human soldiers right now, or the soldier decks right now, I think they're going to be in white and blue based on the cards that we've gotten from this set. So I think, even though it's a cool card, even though it does really good things, do you want to go into a third color to make it happen? And I think probably not is where that answer is. In limited, it's a really good card. And the value of being able to get something back from your graveyard limit is a really powerful ability. So expect to see it played in limited. Last here, we've got Sky Fisher Spider for 2 and a black and a green. So we've got Golgari colors here for a spider. That's a 3/3 with reach. And when Sky Fisher Spider enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target non-land permanent. I think this is actually standard playable if we get a Golgari deck in standard that wants to be played, because the ability to just sacrifice something and then kill the most annoying thing on the other side, that's a really powerful ability. And we've seen cards similar to this in black that have seen play that just can only kill another creature. So I think this is definitely something that if we do get a true Golgari deck, that we'll see it seen play in standard. And also it has a nice death trigger as well. and you may gain 1 life for each creature card in your graveyard when it does die, if you do exile Skyfisher Spider from your graveyard. So most of the time you're going to probably exile it, and then you're going to gain a life for each creature card in your graveyard. So nice ability there on this card. So I think is very playable in Standard, and again, I think getting to a Golgari deck is going to be the key to it. All right, so that's part 1 of our video for today, where we've looked at all of the colored cards from the release today. We got a lot of them. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for staying to the end. Please remember to like and subscribe to the video, and I'll see you in the next one.